The His Girl Friday podcast is brought to you in part by Messenger Fellowship, living the kingdom, fulfilling the call, proclaiming the truth. Last decade, I worked in state government. Between 2010 and 2019, labor and workforce for 2.5 years, and TDOT, Tennessee Department of Transportation, for the other 7.5. Back when my journey began, we were coming out of a recession. I was fresh out of college. Basically, you took any job you could find. Most people weren't so picky with those open doors, so when one opened up, you walked through it, no questions asked. As one might expect with state government, the environment within both gigs, there were some amazing people, don't get me wrong, but overall, there was much to be desired. Kind of like your favorite soda, but it's flat. There just wasn't a lot of bubbliness, morale, positivity, not much in the sense of widespread humility, grace, selflessness. You know, the hallmarks of a healthy, faith-based culture. Or just any fruitful, effective culture. It was just a very different scene than what I'm used to now and maybe what you're used to. After my first year at TDOT in 2013, I started getting frustrated with God as to why he opened a door for me into a place I didn't really fit, let alone have a clear, defined future. At the time, I was 2 years into a 6-time full-time youth ministry assignment. I say full-time, not really full-time, but try to put in full-time effort and part-time hours, right? I had something else going on that provided a purpose punch. I was in ministry, and that was a great thing for me back then. By day, I was often like, okay, well, I have this outlet by night, but man, during the day, God, why? Why did you bring me to this desert? I know you made me for so much more than this. To be honest, part of the struggle was due to my dad and my grandpa, Papa Fry, making it in full-time ministry in various respects. They didn't have a real-time or a real daytime job. So for me not to go 3 for 3 and carry the mantle in that way, I kind of felt like a failure. Looking back over 12 years later, I kind of feel silly for feeling that way. But back then it was a real stronghold. It was a noose around the neck. It was a part of the baggage that I carried. It was the unnecessary guilt of feeling like, okay, I am not special enough, not called enough even, just to be able to make it with my own, quote, ministry, unquote, attached. Well, after a few months of back and forth with God, I was lunching with my dad and my wife, Lissa, back when she was working at Ramsey Solutions in Cool Springs, Tennessee. And we started to talk about our royal priesthood identity coming out of 1 Peter 2:9 and how the concept of being commissioned for ministry was largely confined to licensed liturgy, the idea that only pastors and those called to ministry can be ordained, etc. And during that discussion, we accomplished many things. We dissected the issue in that dichotomy as well as other frustrations. I know for Alyssa and I at the time, we were devoting much energy outside of our ministerial callings, what we did by day. But at the end of that conversation, it hit me how my entire construct of God-given purpose was off. Our purpose isn't given to us by our settings and surroundings. It's given as an inheritance, a faith down payment, a gift from above that not only connects to our original design, but one we're called to exercise throughout our lives, from home to church, from market to marketplace. I had compartmentalized and kind of factioned off ministerial calling from occupational calling. And I basically woke up. The light bulb went off, and I immediately understood why God called me to the desert, i.e. the state. When I say the desert, it might sound like a degrading term. I really don't mean it that way. I just mean, for me, it was a dry, arid wasteland. You think about the desert, there's plenty of people who love being in a desert. A desert is actually appropriate for the environment in certain respects. Now, if the entire world was a desert, not so good. But in the right locations, a desert can be actually a pretty solid place. So looking back, I have more respect for and appreciation for what life was back then. And especially why God called me there at all. I mean, I needed to have an arena, so to speak, where strongholds like pride, ego, faulty belief structures could break off. And again, just take my word for it, I needed that dry and weary land, to quote 363. I needed that for as long as I did. Certainly, he wanted me to see how it was because he had more for me that he called me there. And that was key. For years, again, I had that compartmentalized view of what being on mission, what being in ministry looked like. Yet, I had that youth pastor outlet, but I often wasn't too far from annoyance given the pressure to cram a full-time effort with part-time hours. This is partly why my grudge against the state grew back then before my eyes were open to the truth, how God was calling me to lead in both church and marketplace arenas. There's a lot more I could say about how this season evolved, i.e. planning a Bible study on the 8th floor of the James K. Polk building above TPAC back in 2019, which is also, interestingly enough, the year that I received my ministerial ordination. But it all kind of traced back to that conversation, that lunch back in, January 2014, if I recall correctly. And what I could speak to now concerns one of the initial impacts. Starting in 2015, so about a year after that lunch, I started to study the spiritual gifts as unpacked in Paul's letters in the Old Testament with a fresh pair of eyes. Back then, when His Girl Friday was in development and very early in its formation, I was creating content catered to two sets of vocationals, which is still kind of true today. Those who have a leg in corporate and ministerial arenas and those who were called to ministry outside the church. In the beginning, content was more geared towards number one, the first of that set, but then pretty much ever since I left the state, most of my articles and podcasts have been geared to those called to ministry outside the church, whose ministry is outside church walls, that is. In some of my explorations, I've assessed the spiritual gifts through popular work-based themes: work, home, church life balance, leadership, conflict resolution, networking, technology, goal setting, time management, and others. The more I dug in, the more I continue to dig in, the more I realized there's no hierarchy or exclusivity when it comes to working with Jesus, partnering with Him in daily tasks, and fulfilling God's purpose on our lives. We may be diverse in function, but we're co-equal in value. I know this because the Bible says so. We're co-laborers with Christ, straight out of 1 Corinthians 3:9. The same worldly systems that promote entitlement, reciprocity, self-gratification, preservation, medication, etc. are the same systems that push leadership as a ladder to climb when the word is clear in its trope of leading being the overflow of serving one another in the hope of unity, in the spirit of humility. So going back to the spiritual gifts, not only are there more than we might remember, but our spiritual identity with respect to the gifts, they're no stranger to God. After all, He created us, right? For each person, there is a divine order with varying weights that often goes unknown or misunderstood in spiritual journeys. A lot of people are walking with God, but maybe not so closely to know how they've been wired. Accordingly, it's my belief that any faith-based institution should be keen on helping its participants discover their loved by God identity through the gifts and then seeing how they can be at work while you're at work. Other institutions, not to make this a faith-based only type conversation, I'm sure there's other institutions who are very much a proponent of helping people discover their gift sets, their skills. But I imagine that it would take a faith-based institution to tie it to the New Testament and what Paul wrote about in his letter. So all that being said, I want to focus today on the 7 gifts, the 5-fold ministry gifts in Ephesians 4, plus the 2 leadership/grace gifts that Peter talks about in 1 Peter 4. In both cases, all believers can participate in equipping the saints for ministry, building up the body of Christ, and fostering unity and maturity in the faith. This isn't just for the spiritually elite or the credentialed elite. The licensed liturgy, as I said before, those who are called to minister in the church. We got to get past that mindset. Those who are called to minister in the church, I'm not trying to demean or undermine the authority they carry and even the weight and the load they carry. But we have to see ourselves as being equipped for ministry in our respective arenas. The question is, do we know how to actually execute that? Do we know the gifts that we carry inside of us that God has given us from, that he knew that we would have before the beginning of time, and how to, to live within them as part of our identity at work. And that's why, again, His Glorified has been around for over 10 years now. So I'm going to give it the crashest of courses you may ever receive on the 7 leadership gifts. Again, the fivefold from Ephesians 4, and then the extra 2 from 1 Peter 4. Before I continue, let me just say this, because you're going to see a lot of graphics, and depending on translations, it could get confusing as far as those gifts in 1 Peter 4 specifically, but there's a traditional teaching gift, and then the teaching gift that Peter talks about in 1 Peter 4, 10 through 11, he's really talking about speaking / exhorting a congregation, kind of like an elder would. For those who have been around elders before, the service gift is more of kind of coincides with the deacon office, and a lot of this will make sense in the next few moments. But again, in all these things, we each have a set of spiritual gifts to serve one another as good stewards of God's grace, with the goal that all things glorify God through Jesus Christ. These gifts are not self-focused, but are for the benefit and building up of the body at large with different gift types. So starting with Ephesians 4, let's start with prophets. They call God's people to God's ways. And before I continue, just know that a lot of these definitions are coded in a marketplace grid, if that makes sense. So prophets, they call God's people to God's ways. They're more about developing the design of organizational systems and organizational missions, less about developing people per se. They redeem an environment by expressing a wisdom that gives clarity or clarifies an organization's vision mission for co-workers. Evangelists, those who are gifted to reach unbelievers, they tend to be more gatherers, with acts of service being their community gift. Evangelists are more concerned about developing the organization than developing people. Like prophets, to an extent, they redeem an environment by creating an inclusive team environment through love and acceptance. Pastors, those who encourage believers with the spoken word. More concerned about developing people than managing systems, they redeem their environment by creating joy through encouraging people on how important they are as people to the organization, and by helping them see how their temperaments complement the organization. Teachers, those who systematically make disciples and develop management systems, more concerned about preserving the organization. They redeem their environment by raising team morale through breaking down systems into easy action steps, and by helping them see how the systems help everyone reach their mutual goals. Apostles, they coordinate the other gifts and help them work together. Leading and directing other community gifts, they redeem an environment by coordinating a team in a way that generates hope, maximizing each team member's gift, and designing projects that emphasize a redemptive gift of the organization. Now for the 1 Peter 4 offices, if you will. Elders, those who impart themselves. More about managing people, less about developing people. They are big picture minded in that they see the value of systems, but they really see the value of helping people find their place in the system. Sometimes pastors start that process, but you need an elder who kind of helps actually lock it into place, so to speak. They are manager developers who gravitate to systems, but are motivated to help people find their seat on the bus. Lastly, deacons, more concerned about managing systems for the sake of people, motivated to implement proven systems that help people work together. And as part of the pastoral gift cluster, in the workplace, they may not be so much a direct support capacity or operating in a direct support capacity. They may be hidden from view a lot of times, but nevertheless, they still play an essential role as they redeem an environment by creating an atmosphere of goodness. and gratitude for that matter. They give, they bring order to the organizational environment, and really, deacons, you can almost see them as kind of an underrated glue type that really, like the elder in some ways, like they just do a lot of linking up. And again, we're not just one or the other. Let me be very clear after having reviewed that list. You're not just one or the other, but we have an order. Knowing what that order is very important, especially knowing our top three and how it works in the marketplace, is a game changer. It changes the way we approach, how we perceive work, how we see it as worship, how we approach each day, and how we manage our time, and even how we hope for the best, hoping the best in others, how we pursue other people or serve one another, rather. So there are other gifts. I mean, the Romans 12 and the 1 Corinthians 12, I figure I'll come back to maybe in 4 to 6 months at some point, make it a 26 part 2 to what you're hearing now. And again, before I forget, let me say that this is covered in the Essentials course as part of Messenger Fellowship. So if anyone is interested in perhaps being credentialed as a marketplace minister, we have an online course called The Essentials. If you go to Messenger Fellowship, all lowercase altogether.com, you can find out more information about that course. We are partnered with Faith International University. So for those who are pursuing their MDiv or a degree in theology, our course can count as credits, as supplemental credits or equivalent credits. So even if you just want the knowledge that comes with the course, I say you have nothing to lose, everything to gain in terms of maturing in your godly influence as a kingdom worker, as a co-laborer with Christ, and knowing how your spiritual gifts can be filtered through your occupational calling, to what field that is that God has called you to: accounting, education, the law force, politics, the medical arena. There's so many ways. We are all unique, and the possibilities and the combinations are endless, especially as, we see more AI and technology, and we can, how do we even use the surge in technological advancement to point people to Jesus? Let's not think that it's just one or the other. So I hope you guys have learned a thing or two the past 15 minutes. I just wanted to share this as part of this post. So in case you're not able to read the content, you can at least hear it, listen to it, and then go forth and meditate on it and apply it to your day-to-day life. So that's all I have for you now, but there'll be more to come. Until then, you got this, and I'll catch you on the fry as always. Peace.